The spaceship descended slowly through the thick, swirling clouds of Zeta 7. The planet below was a mix of vibrant greens and deep blues, with sprawling forests stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a world teeming with life, but also danger. Rachel Meyer sat quietly in her seat, staring out the small window beside her. Her heart raced with anticipation. This was the moment she had been waiting for, her chance to make history. She wasn't just an anthropologist. She was humanity's ambassador to the Vortha, a species no human had ever met before. Beside her, John Carter adjusted the controls of the ship with practiced ease. He was a seasoned pilot, his face lined with years of experience navigating the vastness of space. His dark hair was cropped short, and his calm demeanor helped keep everyone grounded during tense moments. Across from them, Lavra Bennett fidgeted nervously with a tablet filled with notes about the planet's ecosystem. She was a biologist eager to study the alien plants and animals that called Zeta 7 home. Her blonde hair was tied back into a loose ponytail, and her wide eyes betrayed both excitement and fear. As the ship broke through the final layer of clouds, the ground came into view. Dense forests stretched endlessly, interrupted only by winding rivers and jagged cliffs. The air shimmered faintly, hinting at some kind of energy field surrounding the area where they planned to land. John guided the craft carefully toward a clearing near the edge of the forest. The engines hummed softly as they touched down, kicking up dust and leaves in a swirling vortex. Rachel unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, smoothing out her uniform. "All right," she said, taking a deep breath. "This is it." John nodded, his expression serious. "Stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." Lavra grabbed her backpack, stuffing it with equipment she might need. "What if they're hostile?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They won't be," Rachel replied firmly. "We're here to show them we mean no harm. That's our priority." The three stepped out of the ship onto the soft, mossy ground. The air smelled fresh, like rain mixed with something sweet and unfamiliar. Tall trees loomed overhead, their broad leaves casting dappled shadows on the ground. Strange bird-like creatures flitted between branches, chirping melodiously. Despite the beauty around them, there was an undeniable tension in the air. They were not alone. Within moments, movement caught their attention. From the edge of the forest emerged figures unlike anything they had ever seen. The Vortha stood tall, towering over the humans. Their bodies were covered in shiny exoskeletons that reflected the light of the twin suns. Long limbs ended in sharp claws, and their heads bore intricate patterns of ridges and spikes. Mandibles clicked rhythmically as they approached, each step deliberate and measured. In their hands, they carried weapons-long spears tipped with glowing orbs of energy that pulsed faintly. Rachel froze for a second, her mind racing. These creatures looked intimidating, almost predatory. But she reminded herself why she was here. Slowly, she raised both hands above her head, palms open, signaling peace. Beside her, John tensed, his hand hovering near the holster of his sidearm. Lavra clutched her backpack tightly, her knuckles white. One of the Vortha stepped forward. Its mandibles clicking faster now. Its eyes, large, multifaceted, and gleaming, studied Rachel intently. Then, unexpectedly, it pointed one clawed finger at her chest. Rachel glanced down, realizing it was pointing at the small emblem pinned to her uniform, the symbol of Earth's United Nations. A wave of relief washed over her. Maybe they understood what it represented. Maybe they recognized it as a sign of goodwill. "Easy," Rachel whispered to her companions. "Let me handle this." She took a cautious step forward, lowering her hands slightly but keeping them visible. Her voice was steady when she spoke, though her words wouldn't mean much without translation. "We come in peace," she said anyway, hoping the tone would convey her intentions. Behind her, Lavra activated the handheld translator device, which began emitting soft beeps as it processed the sounds around them. For several tense seconds, nothing happened. The Vortha leader tilted its head, its mandibles clicking in patterns that sounded almost rhythmic. Finally, the translator emitted a series of clicks and chirps in response, mimicking the alien language. The Vortha paused, its posture shifting. Slightly. It wasn't aggression, it seemed more like curiosity. They're interested, Lavra murmured, glancing at the screen of the translator. It's asking about us. Rachel nodded, emboldened by the reaction. She gestured to herself, then to her companions, repeating the word human slowly. The Vortha leader mimicked the gesture, its claws tapping against its chest. Then it let out a low rumble, which the translator interpreted as a name. Zixkor. Zixkor. Rachel repeated, trying to mimic the sound as best she could. The Vortha leader clicked its mandibles again, this time sounding almost amused. Encouraged, Rachel pointed to the ground, then made a sweeping motion with her arm, indicating the planet. Zeta 7, she said clearly. Zixkor responded with another series of clicks, followed by a gesture toward the forest. The translator struggled to interpret, but eventually fragments of meaning appeared on the screen. Home, strong, fight. Rachel frowned, processing the words. They value strength, she muttered to her team, and fighting. John shifted uncomfortably. Great. So how do we convince them we're not looking for trouble? Before Rachel could answer, Zixkor turned and signaled to its group. Several of the Vortha moved closer, forming a loose circle around the humans. Their weapons remained lowered, but the glowing tips of their spears still cast eerie shadows on the ground. Zixkor extended one clawed hand, pointing toward the ship. They want to see it. Lavra guessed, reading the translator's output. Rachel hesitated, unsure if showing off their technology was wise, but she didn't have much choice. Nodding, she gestured for the Vortha to follow and led them back to the ship. As they walked, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being scrutinized, not just by Zixkor, but by all of them. Every movement, every sound felt significant. When they reached the ship, John opened the hatch, revealing the interior. The Vortha crowded around, their large eyes scanning everything. Some reached out tentatively, touching the smooth metal surfaces with their claws. Others focused on the control panels, their mandibles clicking rapidly as they tried to understand what they were seeing. Rachel watched closely, gauging their reactions. For now, they seemed more curious than hostile. But she knew appearances could be deceiving. These creatures were warriors, judging by their weapons and demeanor. If they perceived humans as weak or unworthy, things could escalate quickly. As the suns began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, Rachel realized this was only the beginning. The Vortha were intelligent, proud, and deeply rooted in their traditions. Building trust would take time and patience, but she was determined to succeed. Humanity's future on Zeta 7 depended on it. The next morning, Rachel woke up early, her mind buzzing with thoughts about the Vortha. She stepped out of the tent and looked around. The clearing where they had landed was quiet, except for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The twin suns were just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the forest. It was peaceful, but Rachel knew better than to let her guard down. The Vortha were still watching them, even if they weren't visible right now. John and Lavra were already up, preparing breakfast. John was heating some packaged food on a small portable stove while Lavra scribbled notes in her journal. "Morning," Rachel said as she joined them. "Did anything happen while I was asleep?" "Not really," John replied, stirring the pot. "A few of them came by last night, but they didn't do anything. Just stood there, watching," Rachel nodded. "That's what worries me. They're curious, but we don't know what they're thinking." Lavara set her pen down and looked at Rachel. "Do you think they'll attack us?" "I don't know," Rachel admitted, "but I'm not going to assume the worst. We need to show them we're here to learn, not fight." After breakfast, Rachel decided to try communicating again. She grabbed the translator device and walked over to where Zixkor and a few other Vortha were standing near the edge of the forest. They turned their heads toward her as she approached, their large eyes glinting in the sunlight. Rachel held up the translator and spoke slowly, repeating simple words like friend and peace. The device chirped and clicked, trying to translate her speech into something the Vortha could understand. Zixkor responded with a series of rapid clicks. The translator struggled to interpret, but fragments of meaning appeared on its screen. Strong, fight, prove, Rachel frowned. They want us to prove ourselves, she muttered under her breath. She glanced at Zixkor, then gestured toward herself. Human... Strong, she said, pointing to her chest. Zixkor tilted its head, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Then it pointed to one of its companions, a smaller Vortha with a scarred exoskeleton. The creature stepped forward, holding its spear tightly. Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach. Was this a challenge? Before she could react, Zixkor made a sweeping motion with its arm, indicating the open space between them. The smaller Vortha took a step closer, its glowing spear aimed directly at Rachel. John and Lavar rushed to her side, alarmed. What's happening? Lavra whispered urgently. I think they want to see what we're made of, Rachel replied, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. She raised her hands again, palms open. No fight, she said firmly, hoping the translator would convey her message. The smaller Vortha hesitated, its mandibles clicking uncertainly. Zixkor stepped forward and emitted a low rumble. The translator beeped, translating part of the sound, test, strength. Rachel swallowed hard. She couldn't back down now. If she did, the Vortha might see humans as weak and unworthy of respect. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. Okay, she said. We'll test strength. But no killing. Zixkor seemed to consider this, its claws tapping against its chest. Finally, it signaled to the smaller Vortha, who lowered its spear slightly. Rachel turned to John and Lavar. Stay back, she instructed. Let me handle this. John opened his mouth to protest, but Rachel gave him a firm look. Reluctantly, he stepped aside, keeping a hand close to his weapon just in case. Rachel faced the Vortha warrior, her heart pounding. She wasn't a fighter, but she had trained in basic self-defense techniques. That would have to be enough. The Vortha lunged suddenly, its movement surprisingly fast. Rachel dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the glowing tip of the spear. She countered with a quick strike to the creature's midsection, aiming for a spot between its armored plates. The Vortha staggered backward, clicking angrily. It swung its spear again, forcing Rachel to duck and roll away. John and Lavra watched anxiously from the sidelines. She's crazy, John muttered, gripping his sidearm tightly. This is insane. She knows what she's doing, Lavara replied, though her voice wavered. At least I hope so. Rachel continued to evade the Vortha's attacks, using her agility to stay out of reach. Each time the creature struck, she found an opening, a weak point in its armor, or a moment when it overextended itself. Her strikes were precise and controlled, designed to incapacitate rather than harm. After several minutes of intense struggle, Rachel managed to knock the spear out of the Vortha's hands. It clattered to the ground, its glowing orb flickering dimly. The Vortha froze, staring at Rachel with wide eyes. For a moment, no one moved. Then Zixkor stepped forward, letting out a series of sharp clicks. The translator interpreted the sounds, strong. Clever, Rachel straightened up, breathing heavily. She bowed slightly to the Vortha, a gesture of respect. No kill, she said, pointing to the fallen spear. Strength without death. Zixkor clicked its mandibles approvingly and gestured for the other Vortha to retrieve the spear. The smaller warrior picked it up, its posture less aggressive now. It studied Rachel for a moment before turning and walking back to the forest. Zixkor lingered for a bit longer, its multifaceted eyes scanning Rachel intently. Then it, too, turned and followed the others, leaving the humans alone in the clearing. Well, John said, breaking the silence. That was terrifying. Rachel wiped sweat from her forehead and smiled faintly. It worked. They understand now that we're not weak. But are they friends or enemies? Lavra asked, still clutching her notebook tightly. I don't think they see things in those terms, Rachel replied. To them, strength is everything. By proving ourselves, we've earned their attention, if not their trust. Over the next few days, the humans continued to interact with the Vortha. Rachel spent hours practicing communication, using gestures, drawings, and the translator to build a rudimentary vocabulary. She learned that the Vortha lived in clans, each led by a dominant warrior like Zixkor. Their society revolved around combat, both physical and verbal. Disputes were settled through duels, and the strongest warriors commanded the most respect. Lavra, meanwhile, focused on studying the environment. She collected samples of plants and soil, analyzing them in a portable lab she had set up near the ship. One day, while examining a patch of moss-like vegetation, she noticed something strange. The ground beneath it was scorched, as if burned by intense heat. At first, she thought it might have been caused by lightning or some natural phenomenon, but as she explored further, she found more patches of scorched earth, all near areas where the Vortha had been seen. Concerned, Lavra brought her findings to Rachel and John. "Look at this," she said, showing them images on her tablet. "These burn marks aren't random. They match the energy signatures of the Vortha's weapons." John frowned. "You think they're damaging their own planet?" "It's possible," Lavra replied. "Their weapons emit radiation that seeps into the soil. If this keeps up, it could destroy the ecosystem." Rachel listened quietly, her expression troubled. "If we tell them, will they care? Or will they see it as a weakness to admit they're harming their home?" "We can't just ignore it," Lavra insisted. "If the Vortha keep using these weapons, they'll ruin their environment and maybe even themselves." Rachel nodded. "Then we'll have to find a way to show them, but carefully. If they think we're criticizing their way of life, it could backfire." As the days passed, Rachel grew more determined to bridge the gap between humans and Vortha. She observed their behavior closely, noting how they resolved conflicts and interacted with one another. Every duel ended in either victory or submission, often with serious injuries or worse. To the Vortha, there was no middle ground. Either you won or you lost. One evening, as the sun set behind the horizon, Rachel sat outside her tent, thinking. She watched the Vortha move through the forest, their glowing spears casting eerie shadows on the trees. They were proud, strong, and deeply rooted in their traditions. But those traditions came at a cost. Lives were lost and the land suffered. Because of it, Rachel realized that simply proving human strength wouldn't be enough. She needed to show the Vortha a different way, a way to resolve conflicts without destruction. It was a risky idea, but she believed it could work. Humans had learned long ago that violence wasn't always the answer. Maybe the Vortha could learn the same lesson. The next morning, Rachel gathered John and Lavra. "I have a plan," she said, "but I'll need your help." "What kind of plan?" John asked warily. "We're going to teach the Vortha about non-lethal combat." Rachel explained. "We'll show them how to fight without killing." Lavra blinked in surprise. "You think they'll go for that?" "They might," Rachel replied. "If we can demonstrate that strength doesn't always mean destruction, they might listen." John crossed his arms. "And if they don't?" "Then we'll deal with it," Rachel said firmly. "But we can't give up before we even try." Together, the three humans began gathering materials from the ship. They fashioned padded armor, shock-absorbing shields, and blunt training weapons designed to incapacitate rather than harm. It was a lot of work, but they were determined to make it happen. When everything was ready, Rachel approached Zixkor and the other Vortha. Holding up one of the padded suits, she gestured toward herself and then to the Vortha. "Fight." "No kill," she said, emphasizing the words. Zixkor studied the equipment curiously, its mandibles clicking rhythmically. Then it signaled for one of its warriors to step forward. "Right." The days following the duel with Kralix were tense but promising. Rachel could see a shift in the Vortha's behavior, though it wasn't universal. Some clans embraced her teachings eagerly, practicing non-lethal combat and experimenting with ways to adapt their weapons for less destructive purposes. Others, led by Kralix, remained skeptical, clinging to their old traditions of violence and dominance. The divide between these groups grew more apparent with each passing day. Kralix didn't challenge Rachel again, but he made his disapproval clear. He gathered his followers and began spreading rumors that humans were trying to weaken the Vortha, making them soft and vulnerable. His words carried weight, especially among younger warriors eager to prove themselves. Rachel knew she had to address this resistance before it escalated into something worse. One morning, as the twin suns rose over the forest, Rachel called John and Lavra to discuss the situation. "We need to do more than just demonstrate non-lethal combat," she said, pacing back and forth in front of their tent. "If we want to win over the Vortha who still doubt us, we have to show them the bigger picture." "What do you mean?" Lavra asked, flipping through her notes. "You've already shown them how to fight without killing." "Yes, but they don't understand why it matters," Rachel replied. "They value strength because it keeps them safe and gives them power. We need to show them that preserving life, both theirs and others, is stronger in the long run." John crossed his arms, frowning. "How do we do that?" "Most of them don't care about things like preserving life, they care about winning." "Then we make it about winning," Rachel said firmly. "We show them that protecting the environment and avoiding unnecessary death makes them stronger as a species. Strong enough to survive on this planet for generations." Lavra nodded slowly. "I think I know where you're going with this. What if we use the data I've been collecting? The radiation from their weapons is poisoning the soil and driving animals away. If we can connect that to their survival, maybe they'll listen." Rachel smiled. "Exactly. Let's organize another demonstration. Not a fight this time, but a lesson. We'll show them what's happening to their world and how it affects them." Later that afternoon, Rachel and her team gathered the Vortha in the same clearing where the duels had taken place. This time, instead of weapons and armor, they brought samples of scorched soil, wilted plants, and images of dying animals. A large screen was set up near the edge of the clearing, powered by equipment from their ship. The Vortha watched curiously. As Rachel stepped forward, holding up a handful of blackened dirt. "This is your land," Rachel began, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "It feeds you, shelters you, and gives you strength. But look what's happening to it." She gestured to Lavra, who projected an image onto the screen. A patch of forest with dead trees and barren ground. The Vortha murmured among themselves, their mandibles clicking in confusion. Zixkor stepped closer, studying the image intently. Kralix hung back, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Rachel continued, pointing to the glowing tips of the Vortha's spears. "Your weapons are powerful, but they hurt the land. The energy they release seeps into the soil and kills the plants. Without plants, there is no food for the animals. And without animals, you will struggle to survive." Lavra took over, showing graphs and charts that illustrated the damage. "This isn't just happening here," she explained. "It's spreading. If nothing changes, the entire ecosystem could collapse within decades." The Vortha shifted uneasily, their clicks growing louder. Some looked at their weapons, while others glanced toward the forest. Zixkor tilted its head, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. Finally, it pointed to the screen and then to Rachel, signaling for her to continue. Rachel seized the opportunity. "There's a way to stop this," she said. "By using your weapons less often or finding new ways to use them, you can protect your land and ensure your survival. Strength isn't just about fighting, it's about protecting what matters most." Kralix stepped forward suddenly, his claws flexing angrily. "You speak of weakness," he growled. "Survival comes from power, not preservation." "No," Rachel countered, meeting his gaze directly. "Survival comes from balance. If you destroy everything around you, what will be left to sustain you?" Kralix snarled, his mandibles snapping shut with a sharp click. "Prove it," he challenged. "Show us this so-called balance." Rachel hesitated, unsure how to respond. Then an idea came to her. "All right," she said. "We'll hold a contest, a test of true strength, your traditional methods versus ours. Whoever wins will decide the future of warfare on Zeta 7. The crowd erupted into excited clicks and chirps. Even Kralix seemed intrigued, though he narrowed his eyes suspiciously. "Very well," he said after a moment. "But if you lose, you leave this planet and never return." Rachel nodded, knowing there was no turning back now. Agreed. The contest was scheduled for 3 days later, giving both sides time to prepare. Rachel spent those days working closely with Lavra and John, brainstorming strategies and refining their approach. They decided to focus on teamwork, demonstrating how cooperation and resourcefulness could outmatch brute force. Meanwhile, Krolix and his followers trained relentlessly, determined to crush their opponents. On the day of the contest, the clearing was packed with Vortha from every clan. The atmosphere was electric, filled with anticipation and tension. Rachel stood with her team, clad in padded armor and armed with blunt training weapons. Across from them, Krolix and his warriors loomed menacingly. Their spears glowing brighter than ever, Zixkor stepped forward to oversee the event, its presence lending an air of authority. It signaled for silence, and the crowd fell still. Then, with a commanding click, it announced the rules. The goal was to incapacitate or subdue the opposing team without causing permanent harm. Whichever side achieved this first would be declared the winner. As the signal to begin echoed through the clearing, chaos erupted. Krolix charged straight at Rachel, his spear aimed directly at her chest. She dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike and countered with a swift blow from her staff. Behind her, John and Levar worked together to fend off two other warriors. Using coordinated movements to keep them at bay, the battle raged on, with both sides exchanging blows and testing each other's defenses. Krolix was relentless, his attacks fierce and unpredictable. But Rachel stayed calm, relying on agility and strategy to stay one step ahead. She noticed that Krolix's warriors often acted independently, focusing solely on their own targets rather than working as a unit. That was their weakness, and Rachel intended to exploit it. Calling out to John and Lavara, she directed them to form a triangle formation, their backs to each other. This allowed them to cover all angles and support one another seamlessly. When Krolix lunged again, Rachel sidestepped and let John intercept him with a well-timed shield bash. As Krolix stumbled, Lavara struck with her staff, knocking him off balance. Seizing the opportunity, Rachel delivered a final blow to Krolix's midsection, sending him sprawling to the ground. Before he could recover, she pressed the tip of her staff against his chest, signaling victory. The crowd gasped in unison, their clicks and chirps rising to a deafening crescendo. For a moment, Krolix lay still, his mandibles clicking furiously. Then, to everyone's surprise, he raised a claw in acknowledgement. "You win," he admitted grudgingly. "Your strength is real." Rachel lowered her staff and extended a hand to help Krolix up. After a brief hesitation, he accepted it. Rising to his feet, the crowd cheered, their voices echoing through the forest. Zixkor approached, clicking approvingly. "You have taught us much," it said. "We will honor your wisdom." As the sun set behind the horizon, casting a warm glow over the clearing, Rachel felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, change never was, but for the first time she saw hope. Hope that humanity and the Vortha could build a future based on mutual respect and understanding, and that was worth every risk they had taken. The days that followed the contest were filled with a mix of celebration and reflection. The Vortha clans gathered in the clearing, their clicks and chirps echoing through the forest as they discussed what had happened. Rachel, John, and Lavar watched quietly from the sidelines, giving the Vortha space to process the changes. It was clear that Krolix's acknowledgement of their methods had shifted something fundamental within the clans. For the first time, there was a sense of unity, a shared understanding that strength could mean more than just domination. Zixkor took the lead in organizing meetings between the clans, encouraging them to share ideas about how to adapt their ways of life. Some suggested modifying their weapons to reduce environmental damage, while others proposed new rituals that emphasized cooperation rather than conflict. Rachel offered her guidance whenever it was needed, but she made sure not to impose her own views too strongly. This was their journey, not hers. Krolix, surprisingly, became one of the most vocal supporters of change. Though he still carried himself with pride and authority, his perspective had softened. During one meeting, he stepped forward and addressed the crowd, his mandibles clicking rhythmically. "Humans have shown us a new path," he said, his words translated by the device. "We must walk it not because they demand it, but because it makes us stronger." Rachel felt a swell of gratitude as she listened. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but seeing Krolix embrace the lessons they had taught meant more than any victory in combat. Change was beginning to take root, and it was spreading faster than she had dared to hope. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Rachel sat outside her tent with John and Lavra. The air was cool, and the sounds of the forest surrounded them, chirping insects, rustling leaves, and distant calls of alien creatures. They had been on Zeta 7 for weeks now, and though their mission was far from over, they allowed themselves a moment to reflect. I can't believe how far we've come, Lavra said, leaning back on her hands. When we first arrived, I thought we'd be lucky to survive the first day, John chuckled softly. Yeah, and now we're helping them rewrite their entire culture. Who would have thought? Rachel smiled, gazing up at the stars peeking through the treetops. It wasn't just us. The Vortha wanted to learn, they just needed someone to show them another way. Lavra nodded, flipping through her notebook. And look at the difference it's making. The radiation levels in? The soil are dropping and some of the plants are starting to recover. Even the animals seem less afraid to come near the clans. That's amazing, Rachel said, her voice filled with quiet pride. But we still have work to do. Their ecosystem won't heal overnight, and neither will their society. John stretched his legs out in front of him, his expression thoughtful. Do you think they'll remember this after we leave? Or will they go back to the way things were? Rachel hesitated, considering the question. I don't know, she admitted. But I think they've seen enough to understand why it matters. Whether or not they stick with it depends on them. And us, Lavra added. If we keep coming back, showing them support, maybe they'll stay on track. Rachel nodded. Exactly. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning. As the humans prepared to depart, the Vortha gathered once more to see them off. The clearing was alive with activity, the clans bringing gifts and tokens of gratitude. Some offered intricately carved stones, while others presented bundles of strange fruits or feathers from local birds. Rachel accepted each gift with a smile, thanking the Vortha for their kindness. Zixkor stepped forward, holding out a small object, a polished shard of crystal etched with patterns resembling those on its exoskeleton. For you, it said, its translator interpreting the clicks, a symbol of our bond. Rachel took the crystal carefully, her fingers brushing against its smooth surface. Thank you, she replied. We'll treasure it always. Krolix approached next, his posture less rigid than usual. He held out a spear, its glowing tip dimmed to a faint pulse. Take this, he said, to remind you of what you've taught us. Rachel hesitated before accepting the weapon, knowing its significance. I'll honor it, she promised. And I'll never forget what we've shared here. As the humans boarded their ship, the Vortha lined up along the edge of the clearing. Watching silently, Rachel paused at the hatch, looking back at the towering figures bathed in the golden light of the setting suns. She raised a hand in farewell, and the Vortha responded by raising their claws in unison, a gesture of respect. And solidarity. Inside the ship, Rachel settled into her seat, clutching the crystal in one hand and the spear in the other. John and Lava busied themselves with pre-flight checks, but the atmosphere was heavy with emotion. No one spoke as the engines hummed to life and the ship lifted off the ground. Leaving the forest behind. Through the window, Rachel watched Zeta 7 grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. The mission had been challenging, even dangerous at times, but it had also been rewarding in ways she hadn't anticipated. They hadn't just changed the Vortha, they had changed themselves. We did good, John said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was soft but sincere, real good. Lavra nodded, smiling faintly. Yeah, we showed them that humanity isn't just about technology or power, it's about compassion. Rachel opened her eyes and looked at her companions. And courage, she added. It takes courage to step into the unknown and try something different. They sat in silence. For a while longer, each lost in their thoughts. The journey back to Earth would take time, but none of them minded. They had stories to tell, lessons to share, and memories to cherish when they finally returned home, Rachel stood before a panel of officials, recounting everything that had happened on Zeta 7. Her report was met with awe and admiration, but also skepticism from some who doubted the Vortha's ability to sustain the changes. Rachel understood their concerns, but she remained confident. The Vortha are proud and strong, she told the panel. They value tradition, yes, but they also value progress. What we gave them wasn't just a lesson in non-lethal combat, it was a chance to redefine what strength means, and they took it. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring plans for future missions to Zeta 7 and beyond. Humanity had proven that diplomacy and empathy could bridge even the widest gaps, and the success of their mission paved the way for greater interstellar cooperation. Months later, Rachel found herself standing in front of a classroom, teaching young students about the importance of understanding and respecting other cultures. She held up the crystal Zixcore had given her, letting the light catch its intricate patterns. This, she said, her voice warm and steady, is a reminder that no matter how different someone seems, we can always find common ground. All it takes is patience, courage, and a willingness to listen. The students stared at the crystal, their eyes wide with wonder. One of them raised a hand. "Do you think we'll ever meet aliens like the Vortha?" he asked. Rachel smiled, thinking back to the towering insectoid creatures she had come to admire. "Maybe," she said, "and when we do, we'll be ready." As the class erupted into excited chatter, Rachel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The Vortha had taught her as much as she had taught them, and their legacy lived on not just in the stars, but in the hearts of those who believed in a better future. The starship Eclipse drifted silently through the vast emptiness of space. Its sleek metallic frame glinted faintly under the light of a distant sun. Inside, life buzzed with activity as the crew carried out their duties. Among them was Ethan Cole, a young cadet who stood out for all the wrong reasons, or so it seemed to his peers. Ethan wasn't like the others. While most of the crew laughed, joked, and shared meals together, Ethan kept to himself. He preferred the quiet corners of the ship, avoiding conversations unless absolutely necessary. Some thought he was shy, while others believed he simply didn't care about fitting in. But those who worked closely with him knew better. Ethan had sharp instincts and an uncanny ability to solve problems that left even seasoned officers scratching their heads. Ethan's reputation aboard the Eclipse was built on actions rather than words. During drills, he moved with precision, completing tasks faster than anyone else. In emergencies, his calm demeanor helped stabilize situations when panic threatened to take over. Yet despite these qualities, there was something distant about him, as if he carried a weight no one else could see. His silence made people curious but also wary. They wondered what went on inside his mind, behind those piercing gray eyes that always seemed to be watching everything. Captain Lisa Monroe noticed this about Ethan too. She'd observed him since he joined the crew 6 months ago. At first, she assumed his quiet nature was just a phase, something he'd grow out of as he settled into life aboard the ship. But as time passed, it became clear that Ethan's silence wasn't going anywhere. Still, she respected him. There was strength in his stillness, a kind of quiet confidence that couldn't be faked. And now, as the Eclipse ventured deeper into uncharted territory, Captain Monroe found herself grateful for every member of her crew, including Ethan. It started with a signal. A faint blip on the long-range scanners caught the attention of Daniel Hayes, the ship's communications specialist. At first, it seemed like interference, just another random noise bouncing around the void of space. But as Daniel fine-tuned the equipment, the signal grew stronger. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. "Captain," he called out, his voice tinged with excitement, "you need to hear this." Lisa hurried over to the console, her brow furrowing as she listened. The sound was strange, almost melodic, yet undeniably artificial. "Where is it coming from?" she asked. "Sector 42B," Daniel replied, pointing at the holographic map hovering above the control panel. "Looks like it's originating from a nearby planet." "That's odd," Lisa muttered. "We haven't detected any signs of intelligent life in this region before." She turned to address the crew. "Prepare a reconnaissance team. We're going down to investigate." Ethereal gas giants loomed in the distance as the eclipse adjusted its course toward the mysterious planet. From orbit it appeared lush and vibrant, covered in dense jungles and crisscrossed by rivers that shimmered like liquid silver. But beauty often masked danger, and Lisa knew better than to let her guard down. As the shuttlecraft descended through the atmosphere, the crew marveled at the alien landscape below. Towering trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves glowing faintly in hues of green and gold. Strange creatures flitted between branches, some resembling birds, others more insect-like with iridescent wings. The landing site was chosen carefully, a clearing near the source of the signal. As the shuttle touched down, Ethan stepped out alongside Rachel Dawson, the ship's medic, and 2 other crew members. Each wore lightweight armor equipped with environmental sensors and communication devices. Weapons were holstered at their sides, though no one expected trouble. After all, they were here to explore, not fight. Rachel glanced at Ethan as they began moving toward the signal's origin. "You okay?" she asked softly. Her tone was gentle, almost motherly, which fit her role perfectly. Rachel had a way of making everyone feel safe, even in the most uncertain situations. Ethan nodded once, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything, but Rachel didn't press him. She was used to his silence by now. Instead, she focused on scanning their surroundings, noting the unusual flora and fauna. The air smelled sweet, like blooming flowers mixed with something metallic. It was intoxicating but not unpleasant. They walked for nearly an hour before reaching the source of the signal. What they found was both fascinating and unsettling. Buried partially in the ground was a large crystalline structure, pulsating with soft blue light. It looked ancient, as if it had been there for centuries, untouched by time or weather. Daniel knelt beside it, running scans with his handheld device. "This is incredible," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "It's emitting some kind of energy signature. I've never seen anything like it." Before anyone could respond, a low rumble echoed through the jungle. The ground trembled slightly, causing everyone to freeze. Then came the sound of snapping branches and heavy footsteps approaching fast. Something big was coming, and it wasn't. A lone dot from the shadows emerged, towering figures clad in dark biomechanical armor. Their bodies were sleek and muscular, exuding power and menace. Glowing red eyes scanned the humans with predatory intensity. These were predators, a species notorious for their love of hunting and their disdain for weaker beings. They carried advanced weapons strapped to their backs and war trophies from past kills dangling from their belts. "Stay calm," Lisa ordered through the coms, though her voice betrayed a hint of tension. "Do not provoke them," but provocation wasn't needed. One of the predators raised a clawed hand, signaling the others to attack. Bright beams of energy shot through the air, striking the ground around the humans. Chaos erupted instantly. Rachel dove for cover behind a fallen log, pulling out her medical kit in case anyone got hurt. Daniel scrambled to retrieve data from the crystal, knowing how valuable it could be. The other 2 crew members fired back with their pistols, trying to hold off the advancing aliens. Ethan reacted differently. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the shuttle, grabbing anyone he could reach along the way. His movements were fluid and deliberate, each step calculated to maximize efficiency. When one of the predators lunged at him, Ethan sidestepped, gracefully using the creature's momentum against it. With a swift kick, he sent it sprawling to the ground, buying precious seconds for his teammates. By the time they reached the shuttle, the situation had gone from bad to worse. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment, rendering the craft useless. Worse still, the predators had surrounded them, cutting off any chance of escape. "We're trapped," Rachel said, her voice trembling. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed on the lead predator, a hulking brute adorned with jagged spikes protruding from its shoulders. The creature stepped forward, raising a weapon that crackled with energy. For a moment, it seemed like the end. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of firing, the predator tilted its head, studying Ethan with curiosity. Perhaps it sensed something different about him, something worth sparing. Whatever the reason, the creature lowered its weapon and barked an order to its companions. Moments later, Ethan and the surviving crew members were bound and dragged away, leaving the jungle and the mysterious crystal dash behind as they were led deeper into the alien territory. Ethan allowed himself a brief glance backward. The shuttle lay in ruins, smoke curling into the sky. He didn't know what awaited them, but one thing was certain: survival would require more than luck. It would demand everything he had and maybe even parts of himself he hadn't yet discovered.